Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you for joining myself and my panel colleagues for this morning's discussion on sustainability and the role in big business looking at supply chain perspectives. My name is Gus Schellikens. I'm a partner with EY, leading a team of consultants in the region focusing on sustainability and clean tech. Joining me today, I have a number of distinguished colleagues. To my immediate left, I have Dr. Neil Hawkins, who works with the Dow Chemical Company. To his left, we have Frank Werner from WEC. Next to him, we have Raji Hatter from Aramex, and finally, John O'Sullivan from BAM. In terms of the agenda for today, In terms of the agenda for today, the discussion is in three parts. There's a short introduction by me and a short presentation by Neil to my left. And then we have a series of questions that I'd like to put to the panel to get their views and insights and reflections on. We then have an opportunity for some questions from the audience. I think a number of you have got iPads in front of you. If you submit your questions, they should come up on my screen here, and I can put some of your questions to the panelists as well. And then at that point, we'll probably be waved at by the organizers as running out of time, and we'll need to close the session, but we'll see how we go. So to kick things off, why have we chosen this topic for discussion today? What I've seen working with many of the private and public sector organizations in the region and also internationally is that there is increasing pressure on all businesses and public sector organizations to meet more demanding goals. We live in a world where sustainability risks are ever increasing, whether it's the risk of extreme weather events, whether it's raw materials that we rely on for the goods that we produce, or just the complexity of supply chains that have grown up and are now in place and we're very dependent on. There's also a more diverse set of stakeholders that all our organizations need to engage with, and also stakeholders that hold us to account, whether it be it the media, be it NGOs or other organizations. The region here, the GCC region, brings with it additional challenges. It's one of the most water-stressed parts of the world. Imports account for a large percentage of everything that is used, produced, and consumed here. And also, it's a unique sort of business ecosystem in terms of its dependency on oil and gas, and developments in the oil and gas industry at the moment, and the decline in the price of oil is also causing us to look at things in different ways now going forward. So the panel this morning will try and tease out how is big business looking at this area of supply chain, of value chain. How are they looking to react, to position themselves to save money, to reduce the risks, the environmental footprint, to do the right thing? How are they looking to influence the community within which they operate, the business community? And also, what are some of the best practices and ideas that are emerging internationally, and perhaps can we apply some of those to the operations in the region here? I'll stop there, and I'll hand over to Neil to give us a short insight from Dow's perspective.
Well, thank you, and good morning, everyone. I'd like to just take a few minutes to give one company's journey, one company's perspective. I think it'll be good input to the discussion. So that's the purpose of this. Dow Chemical, which is a leading material science and agriculture company, has been at this quite a while. I would argue that we started our sustainability journey as a sustainability journey in around 1992. So let's say 23, 24 years ago. And Dow has largely addressed sustainability from an outside-in perspective, trying to meld it into our business strategies and corporate strategies. And we've done it with public goals So we set public goals with public reporting and then work to rally all of our employees around those goals. It's worked very well for us. So if you think about our goal journey, we started around 1995 with our 2005 EH&S goals. So this was a 10-year period, and that was focused on what we would call footprint reduction. We wanted to reduce the impact of our activities on the planet, on our employees, on our communities. So the first period is footprint. The second period, so this was 10 years later, was 2006 to current time, and that was our 2015 sustainability goals. We continued with a set of goals to reduce our footprint, but we added what we call handprint, which is the concept of what are your products doing as they're used throughout the value chain. And so that was the big difference between the first set of goals and the second set of goals, was really getting our minds wrapped around the good that our products are doing, and then maximizing that good through how we allocate resources and motivate our employees. And then third, we have our 2025 sustainability goals, which is our current set of goals. They were announced last year. And we added a concept there. We're going to continue with our footprint reduction, our handprint maximization, but the big concept difference there is blueprint. And this is all about working with diverse stakeholders, government, value chain partners, academics, civil society, to come up with better solutions and really test the limits of cooperation and collaboration so that we can find breakthroughs. If you think about something like providing clean drinking water to all people on the planet, what needs to happen is known. Okay, the solution space is known, yet it doesn't happen. Why? We have to find new ways to actually put together solutions so that we can provide that. Just a couple of quick things. In that first set of goals, our 2005 EH&S goals, which is again footprint reduction, what we learned there is goal setting combined with reporting can really make a big difference. We prevented over 10,000 injuries in that period compared to business as usual. We reduced our waste tremendously, our water use tremendously, and we saved a lot of money. We saved over $5 billion during that period, largely in energy reduction. In our second set of goals, we continued, and because we had done so much reduction of injuries in that first 10-year period, we reduced another 1,000 injuries in the second set of 10-year goals, but we further increased more savings from our goal approach. And so that takes us to our current set of goals that incorporate this new concept of blueprint. So let me just run through those very quickly to give you a sense of how we're approaching working with the value chain, government, and civil society. We have 7 goal areas. Down on the bottom, you see world-leading operations. That's where we're continuing our focus on footprint reduction. Then we have increasing confidence in chemical technology to the right. We believe that chemistry is essential to solving the sustainability challenges faced by all of us here on the planet and in our value chains. But if the public doesn't have confidence in chemistry, it limits what we can do to help provide those challenges. Upper right, delivering breakthrough innovation. That's our R&D portfolio. We spend about $1.5 billion a year on R&D. We want to make sure every solution we come up with is advancing more sustainable products. So that leaves these 4 other areas that are much newer. Leading the blueprint, I've already mentioned, but this is about creating courageous collaborations. Advancing a circular economy, especially in the wake of the Paris Accords, COP21. Many people think of that as just greenhouse gas reduction, and that is true. That's an important part of it. But I think actually closing the loops on materials will end up being, and further using materials before end of life, will end up being a key part of how we help solve global climate change over the next 50 years. Down in the lower left, engaging employees for impact. This is unleashing, we call it our billion-person goal, unleashing our employees to help deliver a positive impact on 1 billion people on the planet. And then last, in the middle, our valuing nature goal, which is actually quite bold and different. We're looking at ways to generate $1 billion of value for Dow in projects that also enhance nature at the same time. And it's not a far-fetched notion, and if anybody is interested, we've published papers around our work in green infrastructure, incorporating wetlands into a water treatment plant. That one project alone in Texas has saved Dow over $200 million. So we believe this $1 billion goal is possible, and we like breakthrough goals that challenge the organization. So those are the goals. One thing I just wanted to put up just to stimulate thinking as well. Our goals were developed using an outside-in external engagement process over 5 years. At the same time, the UN was developing the Sustainable Development Goals. And for those of you who have not paid much attention to those, I think it is worth looking at those as guideposts for where the private sector, our value chains need to head. But our particular set of goals actually touch all of the Sustainable Development Goals. And we've been in a lot of dialogue with value chain partners around how we can all work together to help deliver these goals for the planet. So collaboration, that's what we're all about, and that's what we're hoping to also stimulate here in the panel today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. That sets the scene very helpfully. Frank, I'd like to turn to you to begin with. At the World Environment Center, you work with a lot of organizations around the world. I'd like you to explain just very briefly what the World Environment Center does, but then also share with us what are the findings that you've come up with in terms of what are the most material aspects really around supply chain, environmental risk that you've come across? What are the quick wins? What is the payback for some of these activities as well?
Thank you. Does it work? Yeah. Yes, the World Environment Center is a platform, actually, is an NGO, a platform for large companies like Dow is one member, for the Vice President Sustainability to exchange on ideas how to implement practical solutions for sustainable development. This is a membership organization, and we also, at the same time, work in developing countries to support smaller companies on energy efficiency, water efficiency, and so on. So we're doing capacity building projects in these regions. Well, the benefits of doing those projects in these regions is that these companies can have very quick, very easy wins, and they're not realizing this often. So it's difficult to motivate those companies to participate in such projects, but at the same time, when you start to having built trust, when you do the first investments with those companies, first implementations of measures, then they realize quickly that these things turn off, that these things pay back. So what we have realized in those projects, for example, in Morocco recently, that with investments, I think we had $100,000 per year for 15 small companies on water efficiency, energy efficiency, and waste. The investment paid back after half a year. And these are the easy wins. And so we really want to make sure companies understand that this is an easy thing to do. Although these companies have different priorities first. They want to grow first and not invest in such things. But after a while, when they have grown, when they have many leaks, when the energy efficiency is very bad, they realize, or they should realize, that it doesn't pay off anymore. They have to do these investments. And it makes sense for them.
Great, thank you, Frank. Raji, I'd like to turn to you. Aramex has a long history of being closely involved in sustainability internationally. What triggered that, and what have been some of the findings and the things that you've managed to achieve that have encouraged you to do more?
Thank you, Gus. Aramex is a company that was established in the region here since 1982. We are into the supply chain management, courier business, freight, transportation. And from that, you can imagine what kind of stakeholders do we have across the whole supply chain. Everybody you can think of is a stakeholder of Aramex, taking the governments, the customers, the suppliers, the social community around us, the environment. So, and since we started, and being a very light asset-based company, we decided as a company and since establishment that we are going to be an active citizen in every community we are in. This includes taking care of our environmental footprint. And being a light asset-based company, we don't own our planes, don't own ships, so it's all subcontracted to other stakeholders. So for us to be able to meet our targets, and what we did in 2008, we started establishing targets for cutting down our environmental footprint, making sure that we are in line with all the international and local standards, and making sure that we meet the targets that are set by different types of organizations beside the internal targets. Now, we started working on different aspects of the strategy. Actually, our strategy is called Delivering Good, so we make sure that we deliver, but we deliver a good service that is not harmful for the environment. We started working on our packaging material. We ship more than 40 million shipments a year, and imagine each shipment is put in a bag, and and those bags are plastic. So imagine if these bags were thrown in the landfills, and what will happen to the environment. So we decided then to shift into degradable plastic bags. It's more expensive, but we bear the cost to make sure that we do not harm the environment. We worked on our fleet, and we decided that all our vehicles, and since we are leasing, we have the upper hand on the leasing companies, should be Euro 4 and Euro 5 standard vehicles. And this way, we made sure that we are cutting down on the emissions. Our warehouses that we build are all LEED certified. And the LEED certification is a huge certification where it costs you 5 to 7% of the building cost, but it imposes on you cutting down your energy consumption by 25%, cutting down your water. And we worked on the water recycling in these warehouses. For example, in Dubai, we recycle our sewage water, and we use it for irrigation of the plants around the warehouses. On the supply chain, and as I mentioned, we have lots of interactions with different types of stakeholders. We do an internal, a supplier evaluation form whereby we measure the behavior of our suppliers, the big suppliers and the smaller suppliers. And we try to work with the smaller ones because the big ones are almost in compliance with international standards and it's imposed on them. So working with the smaller suppliers is a bit tough. Because the minute you mention to them sustainability and environment, they'll just freak out thinking that it's a huge investment in money. But we come to the startups and the small companies that we deal with and tell them, listen, change your lighting units into energy saving units. This will pay back in 2 years, 3 years time. Use double-sided printers. Use recycled paper if you can. So making sure that we provide a solution for the stakeholders and not just telling them go and comply with what we have. And on the awareness part, which is an extremely important thing, we work internally and externally as well with, on making sure that our employees get the proper information and they are up to date on how the company is performing and what's needed from them as an internal stakeholder for the company.
Great. No, that's a fantastic track record and achievements, and also in terms of impact that you're beginning to have with the business partners that you have. John, I'd like to turn to you. You work on big capital projects. There's often the opportunity for supply chains for big capital projects to be very diverse and very fragmented. Historically, there's been some bad press as well, just in terms of how some of the environmental things have been managed. I think the industry has become much better at that. What is your view on the area in which you operate in, and how to address and begin to engage with environmental supply chain risks and challenges?
To begin with, I think the most important thing, we have our BAM group, BAM International, our subsidiary of BAM Group. They've set out a strategy for the whole company. Within that, we have 23,000 people working worldwide. And basically the strategy is to reduce the carbon footprint. And all materials that we use are, as best we can, sustainable and will cause no detrimental effect to the environment. So first of all, for each region, it's set out a strategy set out based on KPIs for the year to reduce CO2 emissions, to ensure waste management is managed correctly for subcontractors and suppliers, to ensure that within the subcontract there contains a list of conditions that they need to work with to ensure that we end up with a project in the end. It's not just quality, safety, commercial, on time. It's also a sustainable project. So basically, in terms of the supply chain, our experience dealing with especially the suppliers, we have a process for a vendor assessment, which I've been involved in myself over the last few years, where we actually conduct individual assessment with the suppliers at their offices or factories, and we have a list of requirements. So we check their sustainability. Are they a sustainable supplier? And within that, obviously, as the speaker has just mentioned, there are the larger suppliers are compliant with the sustainability requirements, but it's the smaller suppliers. They tend to have an issue with of, let's say, oh, this is going to cost us money. So what we suggest is or make recommendations in terms of simple things like any deliveries you have to site, the plastic wrappings and the pallets, we want you to return and take them back, and obviously you can reuse them in the factory. So therefore that reduces waste in terms of the contractor taking the pallets and the plastic and putting that into the skip, and us organising then for a licensed waste company like Dulsco to take away the materials and deal with it and deal with that in terms of recycling there. So we set out specific conditions, and generally my experience, subcontractor or suppliers are more than happy. But you have to work with it, because obviously the main thing always, from a supplier's point of view, is cost. Obviously, they're seeing it from a cost point of view, especially the smaller companies. But for us, regardless whether the client specifies, let's say, for the likes of Abu Dhabi, you have Estidama requirements for sustainability. So whether the client specifies it or not, we've got our standard. And obviously, if the client requires this Estidama to be implemented, Therefore, all the suppliers and subcontractors have to comply with that. So, in general, I think we control it, and we control it well. But it's like you have to sit down and set out a strategy, which is set out from the highest level, and it filters down. And it's about communication as well. I think the most important thing is communication and being fair. You know, so it's not like this is the way and you have to follow this. You have to say, look, in the end, you can save yourself money. So that example that I gave earlier about pallets and plastic, that recycling thing, you know, you're coming in, you're taking it away, you're saving yourself money in the end. So it's basically, I think the most important thing I've learned or BAM has learned is communication is key. If you have that and you keep it, you keep it simple in terms of you set out, say we will do this, this and this. And normally if they come on board rather than trying to recommend and not force them to comply, then I think it works better. For an example, Alleyne Stadium, Hassan bin Zayed Stadium, a project that BAM delivered in January 2014. It was a Pearl 2 certification for Estadama. So in terms of waste management, we have waste management compliance. For recycling, we recycled 74% of the materials in Alleyne for that project. In terms of all deliveries to site from suppliers, materials were taken back in terms of pallets. It reduced overall the duration of the project up to maybe 600 skips of rubbish. When you take that in total, if we had to do that, so it worked for us in terms of that cost, reduced cost, but it also worked for the suppliers because they found that they were taking this material back and they were reusing it themselves. So I think sometimes it takes somebody to look, an overview, and it works for both sides. So I think for BAM International, I think we're quite happy that it works, and we're working further to improve it, and based on our vendor assessing of all the suppliers that we use throughout the whole region, we've got a register as well, and based on when they're nominated and they comply with all our requirements, then we assess them throughout the project cycle. So we assess them halfway through the project, and then we assess them at the very end. So we have a continuous improvement as well in terms of suppliers. So it works well.
That sounds great. I mean, I'm lucky to be joined on stage by colleagues who are all sort of very excited and committed to sustainability and particularly in terms of its implementation through the supply chain. But I think for new companies, it's quite daunting sometimes. That there is obviously an investment, there's an impact on your business potentially, there's stages that you need to go through around awareness, education, implementation, compliance, measurement, as you've said, John. And often for a prime contractor, you probably need to do it yourself first before you can begin to impose it on the rest of your supplier community as well. A question for everyone on the panel. If you were a new company listening to the conversation we're having today and thinking, well, maybe I should look at this as well and do something, what would be some of the material areas that should be focused on first, where you could very, very quickly demonstrate that there is a business case for adopting better practices? What might some of the best practices be that you can borrow and apply very quickly, again, to save time and effort on your side? And then for the companies that are active in the region here, what local variations in practices do we need to take into account? Because often taking something internationally and trying to apply it here may not work completely as well, and there need to be local variations to make it fit for purpose. Neil, if I could start with you, perhaps.
Yeah, I think the Dow story that I told earlier is analogous to what all companies have to go through. And the first thing, it was interesting as I listened to all the panelists, I wrote a few notes here. The most basic thing that every company has to do is minimize risks. Okay? I think that there's not a management team around that wouldn't appreciate proactive, thoughtful risk management. So you got to start there. If you don't have that, you're not going to have a company for the long term. So, and that's something most financial CFOs, CEOs understand. Then you have to go to the next stage, which I characterized as our 2005 goals, which is footprint reduction. But it's not reducing the footprint in order just to be good, okay? It saves money. And you have to show where you're saving energy, therefore you're saving money, you're saving waste disposal cost, water processing costs. So in terms of maturity, risk management, then making money through saving money, and you need to go through that step. But then the third piece is growth and growing the company using sustainability trends. And I think it's hard to jump to that if you haven't done the first two. So I would pay attention to that. And then the fourth step, which I think fits more with our 2025 goals, though you'll notice we didn't give up on the risk management, we didn't give up on footprint reduction, we have retained it, is what I would call shared value creation. It's collaboration across value chains, across government, across large ecosystems of players to get more value for everyone through common activity. But again, I don't think you jump in there. I think you go through the steps. But if you're aware what steps you have to go through, you can actually go through them faster by learning from others. Consultancies can help by showing ways to go through those steps more quickly. So I'm optimistic for this region, the companies in this region who haven't started the journey yet. I think it's a journey worth taking, and for sure the first few steps, you're very directly impacting the bottom line. And you can hold your head high and feel very confident that that is going to help your company.
Great, thank you. Frank?
Yes, I can only agree with what Neil says, but I would like to definitely say that reducing risk also has to do with innovation. I think companies always have to realize that the world is not standing still. Everybody is moving. So if large companies are moving in a more sustainable direction, smaller companies have to keep pace because they are suppliers. Large companies will ask them to follow these steps. And new products are being invented. During this conference, we've heard that some old industries are dying rapidly. So everybody has to be aware that the innovation process is also very important to reduce risk. And certainly innovation also helps to, innovation is connected with sustainability, certainly going in a sustainable, operating in a sustainable world and seeing the benefits of sustainable products is also leading the path to growing markets and to become, have a better business. So I would point at the fact that innovation is, sustainability is a means to innovate the company. And therefore, these companies who are not aware of this fact should quickly learn this.
Great, thank you. Raji, please.
Well, agreeing with what my colleague said here, I would look also on a bit of a more tactical approach. I would look at my business process. I would see where do I touch the environment and what the impact there. And based on that, I would be able to put my targets. How would I cut down my carbon footprint? How do I produce products that would be of a benefit to the environment? What are the stakeholders that in the supply chain that I have and in the value chain as well, and how am I impacting them from an environmental point of view, and how can I impact them positively and not negatively? On the other side, I would look at the environmental case as a P&L. I look at it as a profit and loss. I look at what we are doing in Aramex, for example. When we tried to introduce the generating electricity from solar panels, the first thing the finance team looked at me and said, why would I invest $2 million in a project that would pay back in ages? And when we did the study, the project, for example, in Jordan would pay back in 3.5 years. And we are paying more than $400,000 for electricity bills every year. So for them, that was a wow. So looking at the environmental projects as Neil mentioned also, as a revenue-generating projects and a cost-cutting project is also beneficial for the companies who are looking into moving into the environmental good environmental practices. We just leased a vehicle in Sri Lanka, which is 100% electric vehicle. When they looked at the lease contract, everybody was, wow, what would this do to us? In 2 months' time, the guy comes back to me and says, can I increase the number of vehicles in my fleet? When we shifted into CNG vehicles in India and Egypt and the other locations, people were scared because you pay an initial investment of $1,000 per vehicle. Why would I do that? But when they started running them, and we started here in Abu Dhabi, and the guy was complaining the truck is not as powerful as the gasoline, okay, and end of the week when they come to calculate how much cost was that, it's costed us 13 dirhams a day. That's $4 versus $25 to $30 in gasoline. So again, presenting the environmental case as a revenue-generating, cost-cutting aspect would help companies to start getting involved in this.
Thank you, Reggie. John.
From BAM's point of view, we're very lucky. We have sustainability consultants in-house, and year in, year out, they're monitoring the progress as to how the business is as the business is growing. Because based on we've got almost $8 billion US dollars a year is our annual turnover, and looking at that in the various countries, they're looking at best how can we improve sustainability in terms of reducing, most importantly, carbon footprint. We've tracked it over the years, and we found out that, for example, between 2013 to 2015, we've increased our recycling to 86%. And so you can imagine the amount of, in terms of the impact, and in terms of carbon footprint, and in terms of money saving to all stakeholders, in terms of the subcontractor, the supplier, and in terms of BAM itself. It makes financial sense. In terms of the clients, and they see the value in it as well. When we go to project level, in terms of we look at a kind of a long-term plan. If we have a project, can we instead of having side cabins and they're powered with diesel, if we can't connect to the local grid, then obviously there's the use of a solar panel. That again, you have to look at the value over X amount of time. Does it pay off? And those cases are being put forward. Most importantly, we have found that the highest the highest number for the CO2 emission we find is for diesel. So finding something to like in terms of a biofuel to replace diesel. But then again, you look at how much in terms of what that will cost. Because again, you have marine, you have barges, and so on and so forth. Again, I think if where possible, you can connect to the local grid, then obviously that's something that I think will make a huge difference on projects, not just in the Middle East, but globally, as soon as possible at the earliest stage, where the substations or where you can connect in. Therefore, straight away, you're looking at the diesel, the use of diesel, and therefore reducing carbon footprint, and that has a huge impact. We've looked at in terms of our business. That's one. The other thing is water, and how we use water and recycle. So what we've done is in terms of the waste, we're using it for the local, for the plants, etc., on our large infrastructure, which we have on most of our projects in terms of, like, example again, Aline. So again, water meters and use of water meters and how we recycle water. So basically, just to conclude, in terms of the business, it can figures can be calculated, and it can be shown that you can save money, and in the end, and most importantly, the measurable and proven that you are making a contribution to reducing the carbon footprint for the globe.
No, I thank you, John. I mean, seeing is believing. If you can show the savings, then the discussion becomes much easier. Yeah. The challenge sometimes is around how do you quantify those savings in a way that everyone can believe them. We've had a few questions come in from the audience, which is great. I'll share those with the panel now. They fall into two broad areas, one around SMEs and the other one around government policy. So in terms of SMEs, there's a comment here that most innovation in energy efficiency technologies now comes from SMEs. How are big companies tapping into this? There's often a big hurdle for SMEs to partake in larger international projects where the big players dominate. A related question, do you have a specific objective or quota to include SMEs in your larger procurement supply chains for some of the big organizations? And then as a separate question, do you think the government should do more to promote and enforce sustainability targets? So perhaps more policy, regulation, legislation, etc. Do we need more of a stick to make companies behave in the right way? I'll open it up to the panel. Anyone who wants to pick one or other of those two questions and make some comments?
And I'll take the SME one. Actually, it's extremely important to make sure that sustainability is embedded in your business process. For us, the procurement policy says your first supplier should be an SME. If you cannot find an SME that can provide the service, irrespective of what kind of service is there, and even though if it's a bit more expensive, then you go to the corporates. So you embed your sustainability practices within your business processes. You make sure that this is implemented. You make sure that the startups and SMEs are included in your targets. On the other side, on the business side, for example, we run a program for supporting SMEs in the region, and we make sure that these SMEs are getting better rates than maybe corporates. They are included in our mentorship programs, and we pass all our practices to them. So at any point in time, they need to utilize whatever we are using for the environment. They are more than welcome to do that. So build it in your business process, and it's implemented, and you can do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Raji. Neil, do you have a view on either of those two?
Yeah, I was giving it some thought. I think it's best for the economy when companies figure out what is in their best interest to do and do it because it's in their interest. So I think these points around risk management and cost savings are important. I don't think you want to ask governments to regulate things that should naturally occur as awareness is built. Now, having said that, there are points where within our economy that if without government intervention, you're not going to have action. And I think some of those, include, regulation of substances. That would be something that you can't rely on the normal economic processes to self-manage. And then you start getting into other environmental areas where emissions and waste need to be regulated. And then last, and probably the biggest one that we all face, is carbon-related pricing, because after COP21 in Paris, there is a global consensus in most countries, almost virtually all countries on the planet have said we're going to come up with systems to reduce the carbon emissions. And so you're going to end up seeing a variety of carbon pricing mechanisms. For example, in China, they've already announced they're going to have a cap-and-trade program, and other parts of the world will as well. So having that be as rational and clear as possible will help all companies manage a transition over time. And so that would be an example of where to help the markets and the companies within the markets manage through a transition, it would be better to have some government action. So I would differentiate the parts that are in every company's interest, and those companies who do it better will make more money, versus, hey, without some government policy intervention, it's harder for all companies to manage towards a goal.
So there need to be some rules, but there shouldn't be too much interference.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm saying. But on the area where there shouldn't be much interference, what really is important is that companies understand what they can do and should do for their own enlightened self-interest. And that's where I think you have an awareness challenge. We have an awareness challenge, and so most companies here in the room, I'm sure, are enlightened, but for every one of us, there's 500 companies that are not. So we all need to bring together our value chains to help everyone.
I'll return to that later, but
Frank, do you have a view?
Yes, I wanted to say that I support this view, and I think there are actually two unifying frameworks that we have witnessed recently, the Paris Agreement and also the UN Sustainability Goals, because when so many countries or the world agrees on those goals, also the Paris Agreement, then you have kind of a stability. Investors need that, companies want to have that, so there's a consensus that the world moves in this direction. So if you have such frameworks, then I think a lot can happen out of these. So I definitely think that this kind of intervention from government is very necessary, and it will, I hope it helps, and I'm sure it will.
John, do you have any thoughts on the SME question?
I think what would make a huge difference is collaboration of different contractors getting together, and obviously some are more advanced in terms of their good practices than others. So exchanging ideas in terms of what is the best way to deal with the supply chain and so on and so forth, and then in sharing those ideas, obviously they can utilize those ideas in terms of how they deal for their own projects, and I think then it can you're spreading the good word throughout the industry, and I think in terms of the gap, that gap can be filled by spreading that good word, just because we have the knowledge, because obviously our companies are more from the European side, we can share our ideas with them in terms of this is best practice and this is the best way, and therefore all suppliers in terms of the supply chain in a certain timeline, they will all be dealt with in the same way in terms of when a vendor or a due diligence is being conducted. So it's not just one company or two companies are conducting the due diligence or vendor, it's everybody, and it's at the same standard. So I think in terms of something like that, I think it would work very well in the industry and construction, from my experience.
I'd like just to elaborate a bit on the government's role. Now, governments are setting standards and they are putting regulations there, but I think it's more important to use the stick and the carrot. Okay, if you do not do this, I'll fine you, but if you do it and you do it properly, then I'll give you, you will be on my, let's say, golden list in clearance and customs, or when you go and apply for any licensing, because you are environmentally compliant and you are applying all the needed regulations, then you'll have a better time in doing this or doing that, or a lower cost on your imported goods. So it's not just putting the regulation and finding people. You need to give them also the benefit of having a proper, better evaluation on their processes and the implementation within the government bodies. They'll get a better time for clearance, they get a better time for certifications than the other companies who are fined, and they'll go with the regular path for doing that.
Yeah. We are nearing the end of our session, so what I'd like to do is return to you, John, and then work back this way for some closing thoughts. In those closing thoughts, it would be useful to hear your thoughts on, we've recognized how there's an ecosystem of suppliers that all of us need to work with. Sometimes there's a challenge that the maturity of those suppliers is not where it needs to be, so how do you overcome that? And then if we look forward 5, 10, 15 years, what are your thoughts on the circular economy, and will we ever get there, which of course could help us address many of the sustainability challenges in the supply chain that we face at the moment?
Well, I think to start with, I think we have, in terms of materials that are being supplied to the various to the industry. I mean, obviously, they all have a requirement. They have sustainable requirements, X, Y, and Z. So I think something has to be set there, a standard, first of all. So that has to come from at the highest level from the government's point of view. I think that would be, if it's set, let's say for concrete, let's say a material that's used most widespread. So for concrete, basically for all projects, to reduce CO2 emissions, you have to use GGBS or PFA or X, Y, and Z. So I think that would be a good start. And therefore, over the next 15 years, obviously the most important thing is if there is a strategy set out and the main suppliers they are following that, then obviously you have a better chance. You have a better chance overall. The sustainable impact of those materials that are used for the projects over time. So obviously concrete being the big one. I think it will help. I mean, from our point of view, or from contractors' point of view, we value if the government comes to us, we can sit with consultants as well and take in their advice, and obviously we can sit with the suppliers and we can advise them accordingly. So again, I think it's people getting together and getting ideas, and we can filter that throughout the industry.
Great, thank you. Raji, please.
Actually, I'll talk brief on 2 points. The first point, it's important for any company that wants to go into the environmental field is the buy-in of the top management. If this is not there, forget it. Whatever you'll do, you'll not reach the goals that you want to do. The second thing is, and from our experience as well, is the collaboration between the industry peers. So even though your industry peer is a competitor in terms of pricing and selling services, but when it comes to environment, you need to be part of a group that will look at the whole industry and make sure that the industry is cutting down its emissions. And we collaborate with DHL, FedEx, TNT, and UPS through the World Economic Forum on decarbonization of the logistics industry. Even though we go and fight outside on the prices, but when we sit on this goal, we came up with the standards and we came up with processes that needs to be implemented across the whole industry. So it's the industry peers that can help doing that.
Frank, please.
I would like to concentrate on implementing the things. We know so many things. We have done so many audits. So certainly audits are important, but they have their limitations. And I think we should work on supply chains from both ends, from the small suppliers and from the large companies. And so I think our experience shows that all sides benefit from collaborating better than they've done so far. So investing the time to do supplier support visits instead of audits, create trust between your suppliers and yourself, listen to the suppliers and their needs, and also connect this with your own goals. And I think that you will have a good chance to meet with the same things that you want to achieve. So putting your efforts on supplier support visits instead of forcing them to meet your standards is something I would recommend.
Thank you, Frank. Neil, final thoughts from you?
Yeah, very quickly on the circular economy point. I think we need to work together now to study and gain a common understanding of what the opportunities are in closing these resource loops. I think in the longer term, it's going to require government intervention on the policy side, be it retrieval of plastic waste, be it retrieval of electronic waste, whatever. But having a common understanding of the policy objectives and the value creation opportunities for the companies, I think will lead to better public policy. So I would just offer that I think we need to really work together sooner rather than later and not wait till something is thrust upon us. This is a good time the next few years to study proactively what makes sense.
Great, thank you very much. We've run out of time, I'm afraid. I know there's a few other questions that have come in as well, but I think the panelists may be able to hang around for a few minutes afterwards if you want to ask them directly. I'd like to thank my fellow panelists for their time, and perhaps you can join me as well in thanking them for their contribution. Thank you.